Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Oh,
I came to know of your organization very recently, and just looking at the participation, very impressive. So keep up your good work. What I would like to do is actually share an idea. The title I gave suggested is like scientific dating of Mahabharata and Ramayana. I'll talk of both, but if you understand how I did it for Mahabharat, then basically you can say ditto, and then Ramayana repeats. Granted, the text is different, the reference text is different, the specifics of evidence is different, but the focus is same. It's astronomy evidence again. Also, not just astronomy evidence, the multidisciplinary evidence from different disciplines of sciences besides astronomy, so that remains the constant factor. So I will focus mostly on Mahabharat evidence, but then I want to take some time instead of taking you into Ramayana. I want to take some time to give some evidence about Bharat, which becomes a part of frequently asked question, and many times it becomes a hurdle for understanding this evidence of Mahabharata and Ramayana. Actually, it should not, but it does. And that has to do with many people not having refined their understanding of what science is, what scientific acumen is, what logical reasoning is, how do we bring evidence together, exactly what science does. Like many people have this faulty notion that science somehow proves something. Actually, science does not. And that's not a bad thing, by the way. What science does, it creates, using the evidence and in a certain framework, and we'll talk about the framework briefly too, it creates a plausibility, but then it leaves for individuals to understand it. And if we have a time for question and answer, I'll give you a demonstration of that, which is to say, looking at the exactly same data, a group of people, everyone may reach a slightly different understanding of it, a different conclusion, okay, or even a different conviction. So I want to give you some highlight into that besides the specific evidence. So with that, what I'm going to do, I'm actually right now in India, and my internet sometime can go slow there. I have a Wi-Fi, whatever, Geo Air or something. I also have my phone here, also on the Geo network as a hotspot in case I need it. So in case something goes down, just stay connected and I will connect through a hotspot. Okay. So with that, I'm going to turn off my video until I finish my presentation, and I will share a PowerPoint with you. If someone of you, like maybe Aditi or somebody else, just remain in unmute mode, that would be good. In case, I feel like maybe I'm not some issue here, I'll just check if you can still hear me. So that will be good. So I'm going to turn off my video. I'll start sharing the presentation, and I will turn it on again as soon as I'm done with my presentation. So let's go through some slides here. What it does, it allows all of us to stay on the same one page. So that's the only idea behind this slide. Otherwise, I can just talk through it. So scientific dating of Mahabharata and Ramayana, but of course, as I said, I'll focus more on the Mahabharata. Quick summary of my research. A specific research on the dating aspect. Like I have done research in other areas, but that's not a focus tonight. And if there is something I discuss only by way of strengthening the case for this timeline. So this is just a summary of my last 30 years, 30 years of work on the dating. So today is where we are. This horizontal line is the axis of time. So today is like 21st century. If you go back to where zero is written, that's like a 2000 years. The calendar is understood or assumed to be the one that started with the birth of Jesus. Actually, it's not exactly true, but that's how we take the zero, anyways. The Julian calendar supposedly started 45 BC, but you don't need to involve yourself with those complexities. So, zero, everyone knows. If I ask you your birthday, birth year rather, I won't ask you your birthdays. You don't ask the ladies. How old are they? But the birth year, in the sense of just to understand the notion, the Gregorian calendar. So that's that zero, like we are in 21st century, about 2000 years. Now, if you go back into the other side, the minus 5K, minus 10K, minus 15K, 20K, that's 5000 BCE, 10,000 BCE, like before Common Era, 15,000 before Common Era, and so on. Against this timeline, what my work, this is just a quick summary of it. From the Mahabharata text, I'll tell you how I started, but there are close to 300 astronomy descriptions, astronomy evidence, you can say. And when you objectively test it or empirically test it in a very objective fashion, and by objective fashion, I mean there is a repeatability, there is a reproducibility. So, for example, once you understand how a astronomy testing is done, most of you would remember, I don't know what your backgrounds are, but going back to say 10th grade or before, somewhere you would have done the chemistry lab and say titration, the alkali and acid. And we just drop the liquid, one type of liquid, and when the color changes in the flask, we say, that's basically a neutralization. And based on that, we do the mathematical calculations and we say, this is the pH of that liquid or whatever. So this is how we test it, and then we draw the conclusions. So in that similar fashion, in a scientific fashion, or in a simple language, I would say, imagine you solving a jigsaw puzzle or a crossword puzzle. So how we use the different clues and try to fill the blanks, and then the whole puzzle is solved. Something in the similar fashion, but in a scientific way. When I did that, all that 300 plus astronomy evidence points to one specific year, that's 5561 BCE, as the year of Mahabharat war. I will show that to you, at least in a bit elaborate way. Ditto for Ramayana, like Valmiki Ramayana has close to 600 astronomy descriptions. And again, if you solve this puzzle, like a jigsaw puzzle, crossword puzzle, in a scientific fashion, it points to only one date, 12,209 BC. Now, both of these texts, these are called Itihasa, Ramayana and Mahabharata. Okay. Itihasa literally means this is how it happened. And they have a very specific purpose. Now, I don't know how many of you are from the discipline of, say, medicine or law or business, but I'm sure many of you are. And you would have seen that, and even other disciplines, but predominantly these three disciplines do make a lot of usage of case studies. So the case studies are there for what? Essentially, we are looking at something that happened in the past. Maybe it is embellished in such a way that it becomes very useful for educational and instructional purposes. That's how the case studies are written. And then some questions are asked. And now you have to read what is given in the case study information, but then you have to make your assumptions and then respond with the answers. Your answers may be different, but if you follow a logical approach, then even if the answers are different, both parties may get A plus grade, because essentially what we are looking at is, did they think logically through? That was the idea behind writing this Ramayana and Mahabharata. For example, the definition, there are many definitions for Itihas, but one well-known definition goes something like this. It says, now this is in Sanskrit, Dharmartha Kama Mokshanam Upadesham Samanvitam Purva Vruttam Kathayuktam Itihasam Prachakshate. So in order for us to become trained, to train ourselves or become trained in the sense a teaching material, a reference material, a guidebook, which can teach us about Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. And how's this guidebook created? Purva Vruttam Katha Yuktam. A historical event is taken, but now it is told to us in a katha form, in a story form, okay? A narrative form that kind of becomes engaging to us, interesting, enlightening, holds our interest. Purva Vruttam Katha Yuktam Itihasam Prachakshate. Such a text is called Itihasa. There might have been many other texts, but as far as India is concerned, we are left with only Mahabharata and Ramayana. In fact, as far as the Itihas as a genre is concerned, only in the entire world, there is only Ramayana and Mahabharata. That is not to say there are no historical texts in the other world, but again, other parts of the world. But that's not a subject today, so we'll stick with this. Now, both Ramayana and Mahabharata, they have a mention of all the Vedas, Rigved, Yajurved, Samaved, Atharvaved. But we'll take Rigved, which is considered one of the oldest, but we'll take it as one of the oldest. Now, there are descriptions in Rigveda, the astronomy descriptions, but especially I'm going to use here the river descriptions. Like everyone would have heard about a great river Saraswati that no longer exists. And how is the Saraswati is described in Rigveda? Naditame, Ambitame, Devitame, Saraswati, the grandest of the grand river. And now the evidence that we have for river Saraswati, so it did exist, but the evidence today it does not exist. But the evidence we have shows that such a grand river existed only more than 20,000 years ago. And that's how I have written that number more than 21,000 BC for Rigveda. How old is Rigveda? We don't know, and that's not a subject today. In fact, I'm going to focus on Mahabharata, but this is just a quick summary. So, how did I get into this? Now, in the description, I heard the age group between what, 18 or 35. So I'm going to say most of you who are listening to this were not even born, okay, when this story began. My interaction with dating of Mahabharata research. The year was 1994. I was just finishing my master's at the University of Alberta in Canada. Very beautiful place, but very cold in winter and a long winters. And I had like about 15 days, before I start my first official job in Canada in a petroleum industry. So I had 15 days, and so I said, "Oh, this is the first time I get a true break." And I was just walking through the one of the very good library, so amazing libraries. That is a great thing about American universities. And I was spending time in the Indian section, just exploring some of the books. I said, "What do I? Let me explore what I find." And I ran into this entire big collection, like 19 volumes, very huge, of the critical edition of Mahabharata that was created by Bhandarkar Research Oriental Institute. Some of you might have heard the name, Bori, in Pune. And it was like a generational project. Like it took about 30 to 40 to 60 years to complete that whole project. So just out of curiosity, I said, let me find out where Bhagavad Gita is in the Mahabharata. And I'm sure you possibly, most of you know that Bhagavad Gita is in the Mahabharata. And I even knew more about more or less where it is. So I pulled the Bhishma Parva, a very thick book, one of the 18 Parvas, one of the thickest rather. And I started reading from the first chapter, looking for when does the Bhagavad Gita begins. Now, I don't know how many of you know Bhagavad Gita, but those of you who do know, the beginning goes something like Dhritarashtra Uvacha, Dharmakshetre, Kurukshetre, Samaveta, Yuyutsava. So that's the one I was looking for. Like it would be some adhyay. Just the answer, by the way, is like adhyay number 23, but I did not know that at that time. But I did not go that far. Actually, I ran into chapter 2 and chapter 3, and I was amazed. Like there was one after another, like a series of astronomy configuration, astronomy descriptions that Vyasadeva, the one of the character in Mahabharata, but the writer of Mahabharata, he is describing to the blind king Dhritarashtra. If you remember, the father of the Kauravas. And he meaning Vyasa is trying to convince Dhritarashtra to make a last minute attempt to see if Dhritarashtra can stop his son Duryodhan from stopping the war. And in that context, he's telling all kinds of things. And also, he's telling the positions of different stars and planets and whatnot at the time of the Mahabharata war, just day before the war is going to begin. Now, that's okay. That was kind of surprise. But what was more surprising to me, and I'm going to go a bit fast through the text to bring to a certain thing, and I'll come back to it if I need to. What was more surprising is this verse that I'm showing you on the screen. If you can read Nagari script, you can read it. If not, you can just listen. Ya chaisha visruta rajas trailokye sadhu sammata arundhati taya pesha vasishta prushtata krutaha. Now, my Sanskrit is limited, but enough to understand what is being said. And also, I had a decent understanding. I wouldn't say a great understanding of astronomy, but decent understanding of astronomy. And precisely for this reason, this particular shlok caught my attention. Now, what is so big deal about this? Again, this is not a fully interactive. Otherwise, I would have asked a question, which I do when I'm in the auditorium, which is to say, how many of you, but as I ask the question, you can answer yourself in your mind. How many of you are familiar with this Saptarshi, or the Ursa Major in the sky? Like 7 stars, like the 4 stars create a rectangle like structure, and then there is a tail. You can think of this as a kite and a tail also, if you like. And the tail has 3 stars. The middle star in the tail is called Vasishta. And next to that, I don't know if you can see my mouse arrow here, cursor, but just next to that, it's not very easy to see in the picture here. There is a very small star here where I'm pointing the arrow. That's called Arundhati. In modern astronomy, Arundhati is called Alcor, Vasishta is called Mizar. But what's so surprising? Okay, I mean, astronomy descriptions can be there in our text. They are there in many texts of at least the Indian text. The surprising thing about this was the way Vyasa is describing the position of Arundhati and Vasishta at the time of Mahabharata war, like a day before, is not how we see it today. So what Vyasa is telling Dhritarashtra is the Arundhati, the star Alcor, is walking ahead of Vasishta, the bigger star, at the time of Mahabharata war. And that's not how we see it today. In fact, if you are in a place where you can see clear skies and you go at night right now or any time of the year, and you find out when the Saptarshis are up, what you're going to find out, and you might need a binocular, if you don't have a very bright, a perfect eyesight, 2020. But you will see that the Vasishta comes first, Arundhati behind, exactly opposite of what Vyasa was saying. And if you look at the development of modern science of last 500 years, or the development of humanity, basically we have learned through these surprises. Okay, so this was a surprise. I mean, Vyasa is saying exactly opposite, and my knowledge of astronomy was decent enough that I knew this is something that is not going to be easily possible. In fact, what I did is I just contacted one of my professor there, actually just a friend professor. I'm just stopping it for a second. I'm going to open my camera so you can see my hand movements. So in the sky, like the way I showed it to you, okay? So it is like this. For example, think of this as Arundhati, and my hand with the Rakhi, the Raksha Bandhan thing in the other hand. Think of this as the Vasishta, and this is Arundhati, okay? This is north. So Arundhati is to the north of Vasishta. And as you see at my picture there, okay, this Vasishta is to the west of Arundhati. So think of a map. This will look to your right, that is to say east direction. And right now, if you look at night, they go like this. Okay, they go in this fashion. So Vasishta is ahead, Arundhati is behind. Now, this was a challenge because these stars are extremely stable. And then in that particular problem, I saw a great potential. I said, if I can find out ever a possibility that, see, this is Arundhati, this is Vasishta. If I can ever find a way they can be like this, so that Arundhati is ahead and Vasishta is behind. And if I can find out the time period, I did not know whether to expect a 1 year, multiple years. But if I can find out, I would know the timing of Mahabharata. This is the kind of evidence we are always looking for in progressing our knowledge in any field of science. So now, I was just a freshly graduating engineer. I mean, master's degree, bachelor's and master's. I did my bachelor's in Mumbai here. And so maybe you can say I was a bit overconfident about myself. So I thought I have got 15 days and I'm going to very likely solve this problem. Well, actually, I did solve a problem, except, let me see here. Okay. Except it did not happen in 15 days, but rather it took me 15 years. So from 1994, when most of you were not born, until 2009, where some of you were born, it took me 15 years to solve this problem. Okay. As to, did Arundhati really walk ahead of Vasishta anytime in the past? And if it did, when did that happen? And of course, the true question is, why did it happen? But I will not take you into why did it happen, but I want to show you that yes, it did happen. And exactly when did it happen? So fast forward from 1994 to 2009, and here is the resolution that yes, there was indeed a time in the past when Arundhati walked ahead of Vasishta, as described by Vyasa to Dhritarashtra day before the Mahabharata war. And actually, it wasn't just a day-long phenomenon. In fact, such a phenomenon existed for about 6,000 years, from any time after 11,000 BC and before 4,500 BC. So anyone, say in the northern hemisphere, say take anywhere in India, anywhere in North America, Canada, Europe, anywhere, Russia, China, doesn't matter, as long as you are in a northern hemisphere, reasonably speaking, and you can see the Saptarshis. Anytime you would see them in the sky during this time, we would have seen Arundhati walk ahead of Vasishta. So now, can you put this together? I will show you in a minute the scientific framework. But just from the logic, Vyasa is saying Arundhati is ahead of Vasishta. In our times, it is not ahead of Vasishta. But if we go back, we do find a time interval when actually Arundhati is walking ahead of Vasishta, just like Vyasa said at the time of Mahabharata. Based on that, we can say the inference we can draw is that if we accept that statement of Vyasa, then Mahabharata happened sometime after 11,000 BC, sometime before 4,500 BC. Do you understand that? I'll take that as a yes, since I don't want everyone to unmute that. Now, fast forward by about 10 years. Okay. And this is very important. And that happens in science all the time. Just because somebody tells us, we don't blindly accept it. You might have heard the phrase trust, but verify. And so 10 years down the road after 2009, by the way, as I told you, this is the year of the Mahabharata war, and I'm explaining how we came to that. In fact, if you're watching Netflix series these days, you would know some detective serial. Actually, to us viewers, they show exactly who murdered who. And then the rest of the series is about how the detective found the murder, something like that. Just imagine. We know the answer. Now I'm taking you how I arrived at the answer. So I knew it has to be in this time interval. Fast forward to 10 years. There was another guy, Siddhartha Chabra, okay, again lives in Michigan, of Indian origin. And he had this doubt, curiosity, whatever you want to call it. Says, well, let me see. I mean, let me not take this blindly. Whatever Nilesh is saying, is this true? So what he did about 10 years after my discovery, he looked at the recent data and tried to validate what I was saying, if it is correct. Then he came up with answers saying, yeah, it is correct, except one change. With the more precise data on astronomy, actually, he found the time interval for this to be true is to be much narrower, like narrower by about 1,000 years, like from 10,000 BC to 4636 BC. So about 1,000 years drop. Now, this is a good thing. Because remember, at that time, I did not know 5561 BC as the year of Mahabharata war. So when I searched for it in 2009, I was searching within that 6,000 years. Now, if Siddhartha Chabra had to do it 10 years after, he has to look for only 5,000 years. But, this is not the only evidence. Remember, I mentioned 300 pieces of evidence. We'll quickly go through that. But this is how the science works, okay? In America, I don't know how it is in India these days, but we like these short forms, like a doubt clearing machine. So I call it a DCM. Okay, then people love it. So there is a tough problem to solve, such as like when did the Mahabharata war happen, for example. To solve this, we propose a hypothesis. So what is my hypothesis? Based on this Arundhati, I put forward a hypothesis. In fact, that's why I was working on just this one problem for 15 years. I said, unless I figure out if Arundhati can go ahead and when it can go ahead, I'm not going to waste my time trying to date this thing. But what is my hypothesis? If I want to truly find out when Arundhati goes ahead of Vasishtha, the hypothesis is the astronomy evidence of the Mahabharata text is the actual descriptions of the Mahabharata times. Like at the time of Mahabharata, I want Arundhati to walk ahead of Vasishtha, the way Vyasa says. So that's the hypothesis. Then actually I looked at the evidence like that Shabda Praman, their evidence is Yachesha Visuta Rajas. Then 15 years fast forward, I objectively found a way to show this using astronomy that yes, there was indeed a time of 6,000 years from 11,000 to 4,500 BCE where it walked ahead. And therefore, what is the inference? The inference is that Mahabharata war happened sometime before 4508 BCE, after 11,000 BCE. And in the process, the background knowledge I use is what? Modern astronomy, Indian astronomy, Mahabharata text, Sanskrit Shlok, their translations, Sanskrit English dictionary, and so on. Okay. And the answer right at this stage was yes, it happened sometime before 4508 BCE. But from there, how do I get to the specific years? Okay. Specific 5561 BCE. So this one was successful. So I started with the problem, did Arundhati walk ahead of Vasishtha? I proposed a solution that this must be a real life observable phenomenon at the time of Mahabharat war. So that's my tentative theory. It's an actual description. Then fast forward to 15 years, I eliminated the error because until then it was not walking ahead of Vasishtha. But finally, I figured out that there is actually a time interval, and I'll not go into the technical details. But yes, I could eliminate the error. There is indeed a time. But now, is this the end of it? Well, it's not the end of it. I have not found the year of Mahabharat war, but something more. I mean, could this be just a coincidence? What about additional evidence from the Mahabharata text? Does it also points to the time interval shown by Arundhati Vasishtha? So that's like the next problem, okay? And so now we get into solving that. So, for example, there is a other event. Most of you would have heard about it if you are a little bit familiar with Mahabharata. It's called Bhishma Nirvan. Now, again, this is not interactive, so I'm going to ask a question, see if you can answer in your mind. Like, how long did the Mahabharat war last? The answer is 18 days. And for the first 10 days, Bhishma was the military general for the Kaurava side. 10th day, he fell down in the battle, but he did not die. Some of you might know that. He had a special ability. He can decide when he want to leave his prana. So, and for whatever the assumptions of that time, I'll not go into that, but he wanted to wait until the day of winter solstice. And only when the sun turned northward, he wanted to give up his life. So from the 10th day of the war, he was on the bed of arrows until waiting for the day of winter solstice. And Mahabharata text through different parvas actually have close to 100 different pieces of astronomy evidence that actually points to a time interval when Bhishma was on the bed of arrows. And that occurs to be more than 90 days, more than 92 days, more than 95 days. Okay. Now, what do we do with this evidence? Well, what this evidence does is just like we showed for Arundhati Vasishtha, if we bring our understanding of astronomy, like Bhishma has to be on the bed of arrows for more than 95 days, waiting for a day of winter solstice. The war actually occurred in the month of Margashirsha. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Indian months, like a lunar months, like Chaitra, Vaishak, Jeshta, Ashad, Shravan, and so on. But that Margashirsha month, that's what Mahabharata text has sufficient evidence. And if you bring that all together, I will not bore you with the astronomy details. Well, even if I want to, unless you have some background, it would be really, really difficult. But it's very clear that based on the Bhishma Nirvana evidence, Mahabharat war could have happened only between these two dates. Just remember that. And if you can refine it with additional evidence of Bhishma Nirvana, you can say, only between these dates, only between these dates. So essentially, Now you have a shorter interval of about 1500 years from 6722 BCE to 5125 BCE, where only Mahabharat war can happen, just like we did for Arundhati Vasishta. But notice something. Some of the years I'm giving are so precise, I mean, so it's like I'm not saying 6,000, I'm saying 6,722. Well, that's the beauty of astronomy evidence, and also the beauty of the way the evidence is there in Bhishma Nirvana, and therefore in the Mahabharata text. So now I have only 1600 years time interval to look for the year of Mahabharata war. Now, keep in mind, guys, I'm telling you this story about what? Um, about 15, 18 years after the fact. So now I'm giving you all this information. I did not have that information. All I had was like a 6,000 year time interval, and I had to look for the date. But anyways, the point is, now how do we narrow it down to that 5561 BCE? And thankfully, I will ask you if you have a timing question answer, if any one of you are into astronomy, you'll be amazed to know that the Mahabharata astronomy is 10 times more precise, more better than what? Well, I'll try to answer that question, but it's a very amazing astronomy. Mahabharata astronomy, ditto for a Ramayana astronomy, but definitely Mahabharata is a much more so. Just to give you a feel, I'm telling you what kind of rich data is there. For example, Saturn, there are like about 6 descriptions of Saturn in the Mahabharata text. Again, think of a jigsaw puzzle or think of a crossword puzzle. Like, there are 6 different ways the Saturn's positions are described in Mahabharata. There are 4 different ways the positions of Jupiter are described in Mahabharata. There are 8 different descriptions of Mars, about 8 or so descriptions of Venus, and about 10 descriptions of Mercury. And of course, there are additional descriptions of sun and a moon and the phases of the moon and the lunar months and tithi and so on. But so Mahabharata loves puzzles. So again, that jigsaw puzzle, crossword puzzle. So I'm putting this together in a limited time that we have. There are these different aspects as these planetary positions are described. And if you solve this, all of them in a very consistent fashion, therefore I will use the word logical and scientific and empirical there, because it has to be repeatable and reproducible. This is what took us to that 5561 BCE. But for a second, I'm going to go back to Mars. Something very interesting that I found out afterwards, by the way, not at that time, that if you take these 8 descriptions of Mars and just for a second, forget Arundhati Vasishta, forget Bhishma Nirvana evidence, forget all other planetary evidence. If you just work on Mars, it just so happens, that is the beauty of how Vyasa must have captured this. And I don't know if it was just a coincidence or intentional, but if you take only these 8 descriptions of Mars and if you know basic astronomy, this evidence also takes you to 5561 BCE, just these only 8 descriptions and no other. This is how powerful this Mahabharata evidence is. Okay. And in case you are wondering, like, am I like this Nilesh? Is he forcing this jigsaw puzzle like thing or a crossword puzzle like demand on the Mahabharata text? The answer is no. Actually, the disciples of Vyasadeva, after they are telling this Mahabharata, it has been told and retold like 4 times in the 100 years after Mahabharata war, and that's how it comes to us. Even they are saying, so for example, Roma Harshana Sauti, one of the disciple there, when he is telling to the sages who have come together in Naimisharanya, somewhere in the northern India, he's saying, look, how did this Vyasa has created this Itihasa, Mahabharata? He says, Grantham Granthi Tada Chakre Munir Gudam Kutuhalat. He has made it deliberately, which is like a full of curiosities, just like a magician, deliberately creates a setup, to startle us, to amaze us, something like this. Grantham Granthi Tada Chakre Munir Gudam Kutuhalat. This text is full of curiosities, full of mysteries, okay? Guda Goshti. And it's also Grantham Granthi. It has lots of knots, deliberate knots that we have to untie, okay? And that's only we can come to the answer. So there are many such things. So that's how I got to 5561 BC. But there are many other mysterious things. For example, how many of you have heard about Kunti giving birth to five Pandavas, with a certain mantra and so on? And you know what? If you are thinking, I know the secret to that, no, I don't. But in fact, I don't know how many of you know this. When Kunti invoked the mantra for Surya, and we don't know what that invoking of the mantra was. I mean, it can be a subject of great discussion. I mean, was it the sun with one person named Surya, or was it a sperm bank? We just don't know that. But what we do know is that actually Kunti did not create Karna instantaneously. If you read Mahabharata, and I would encourage all of you, at least those of you who are interested, to read Mahabharata. She became pregnant. Her servants. She was a princess. They protected her from the public eye for 9 months, and then she gave birth to Karna. Okay, but something interesting. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you might have heard the word parthenogenesis. And if you look at the etymology, it comes like a Greek word. But then you look at so parthenogenesis, Kunti's name, another name is a Prutha. Okay, and that's why Arjun is called Partha as a son of Prutha. And then in a Greek language, which is a offshoot of Sanskrit, from various sources, I'll not go into that subject either. But it means virgin, but that's a speculative. The point is, nobody really even knows what is the origin of that Greek word, even within the Greek language sphere. But just as a coincidence, maybe, but I want to tell you the parthenogenesis and the Prutha has that connection. Okay. And so you can actually go and look at this words. Just as a sidebar, if you want to do this, you can go to the etymology online and type any English words and do this for like 1,000 words. You'll be amazed to know that in at least 40% of the time, English is far removed from Sanskrit. But even then, in 40% of the time, the origin of an English word, it will bring you to Sanskrit. And of course, if you do that for Latin, which is to say for, say, Italian or French or Spanish, like the Romance languages, then you will find that number goes to 60% and so on. Just a sidebar, but I thought I'll mention it. Now, people ask, okay, so astronomy is great. I mean, you can pinpoint a specific date, but we need something to look at, something to physically look at, something on the ground. Now, actually, astronomy evidence is great because, something on the ground can be fudged if somebody wants to. And that's what a lot of that fudging has happened over the last 300 years as far as dealing with the Indian history. But you cannot do that easily with the stars. I mean, you can jump into the sky and change the location of a star or something like this. But still, we also want to see something on the ground. So the question that I get all the time, and of course, I did not wait for the question. After I figured out the timing of Mahabharata in 2009, I wrote a book, When Did the Mahabharata War Happen in 11? And since then, I am searching for additional evidence, and I haven't found like in 20 different disciplines. I'm just going to share a couple of them here. So oceanography. Now, how many of you have heard that after the Mahabharata war, 36 years after the Mahabharata war, Krishna's Dwarka was destroyed, which is in Gujarat, right? Or was in Gujarat, you can say, was destroyed by rising sea level water, rising sea waters. So I asked the question to myself, remember that tetradic schema I showed you, P1, TT, EE, P2? We can use the same thing. So yes, we solved the problem of the year of Mahabharata war. Now we can ask, okay, so if 5561 BCE is the year of Mahabharata war, and Mahabharata text tells us 36 years after the Mahabharata war, Krishna's Dwarka was gone by rising sea levels. So that's what, 5561 30 plus 36, but here we have to subtract because it's a before common era. So that's 5525 BCE is the predicted year of the Krishna's Dwarka being destroyed. Now, do we see any evidence for that? That is the question I ask myself. That is my P2. So I know the year 5525 BC as a prediction. Is there any evidence? And I'm just going to share a couple of pieces of evidence here. So this is our India. This is the Arabian Sea. At the bottom is Indian Ocean. This is a Bay of Bengal. But where I have circled, that's the Arabian Sea. And what you see on the right side is the data coming from that. So if you look at the horizontal axis, that is the axis of time. So here you have like a 2000, 1000, 0, and then 1000, 2000, 3000, 4000, 5000 BCE. Where I have drawn the vertical red dotted line is that 5525 BCE. And my y-axis is the sea level rise. So follow this curve. I hope you can see the cursor of, that I'm drawing on the screen here. So this is the sea level rise, and notice what is happening right at the middle of 6 millennium BCE, that is 5525 BCE, somewhere there. A sudden sea level rise of about 15 meters. And then if you continue for the next 500 to 1000 years or so, additional 8 meters, the total of 23 meters. That's like more than 50, 60 feet. Okay, sudden sea level rise, and this is the average sea level rise. In some places, it can be more. So this is a very wonderful, very distinct, clear evidence for sudden sea level rise right at 5525 BCE, right where we want it. That's the west coast of India and Dwarka. See, current Dwarka, again, if you can see my cursor, current Dwarka is here, where if you go there, Krishna Mandir. Krishna's Dwarka, you have to come down to Somnath and actually start swimming in the ocean for about 15 to 20 kilometers. So somewhere here was where Krishna's Dwarka was, which is no longer there. It is under water and gone. But is this the only piece of evidence? Actually, it's not. You can see, because of time, I'm not going to go into that, but you can see amazing, very distinct, powerful, impressive evidence for sudden sea level rise in 5525 BCE. Not only here where the Dwarka is, but even on the east coast of India, in Indonesia, in Australia, like Great Barrier Reefs and whatnot. But actually, even in West Indies, if you follow cricket, even in the West Indies, but frankly, all around the world. Okay, I mean, I have you are young and you don't have a sleeping problems. Maybe you don't get enough sleep, although you would like to sleep. But you can watch my 20 videos just on this flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka in 5525 BCE. For every circle, I have like a hour-long video going through the specific evidence. So very, very solid evidence, not only the astronomy evidence, which is indeed powerful, but evidence on the ground also. If you can find data from any field of science, and if the data does go back to that 7,500 plus years, like 5561 BC area, and if there is a relevant description in the Mahabharata text, what I have found over the last 15 years, since 2011, is that that data beautifully matches the Mahabharata descriptions, and therefore the 5561 BCE. For example, this data, I showed you Caribbean, like the West Indies. This is a 1995 paper by Paul Blanchon. He's a now professor in Mexico. He was doing PhD at the University of Alberta when I was doing my master's in chemical engineering, and I ran into this Arundhati Vasishta. This is a wonderful, amazing paper, 1995 paper, when he and me both graduated, so to say, around that time. What do you see here? I don't know if you have heard about the Atlantis and, of course, the Ravana's Lanka, but something very interesting. This is Krishna's Dwarka again, but the evidence is from Caribbean. Sudden 6.5 meter rise, 7.6 K, that is 7,600 before present. You subtract, say, 2,000, and you get what? 5,600 plus minus certain things. So this is evidence that matches with the Krishna's Dwarka. But something, if you have heard the Plato's Atlantis, I don't know if you are into it. But if you have heard about Plato's Atlantis, do you know what Plato says about 2,500 years ago? He refers to a historical record saying Atlantis, there was a place called Atlantis, like think of it as an island or whatnot, and it went under the ocean 9,000 years before him. So 9,000 years before 500 BCE. So what is that? If you add 9,000 plus 2,500, that is 11,500 years. Okay. So 500 BC before 9,000 years is 9,500 BC. And if you turn that into before present Ka, that's 11.5, and look at this signal. This is more than a coincidence. Okay, so yes, there was a sudden sea level rise even here also. So there is a smooth sea level rise, but these are known as a CRE, catastrophic rise event, like sudden sea level rise. And then there is a last one. I didn't talk much about the Lanka or Ramayana, but Ravana's Lanka, we don't have it in Valmiki Ramayana, but we have in the social memory of, say, Kerala or Gujarat or different parts of Gujarat, like Kutch, but also in the Dang area that I was there last year in June. And they also have this social memory that Ravana's Lanka was gone and destroyed after Ravana was killed, just some time after. And actually, I have shown remember, the Ramayana time to be 12,209 BCE based on astronomy evidence. But here also there is a sudden sea level rise, and possibly that might have destroyed Ravana's Lanka. Now that remains a speculation, okay? But the evidence is there, and it matches with the social memory. But something else, like something that we can connect very much to ourselves, like very much us. There is one piece of evidence I want to share, and then I will stop. Genetics. Now, how many of you remember how many soldiers fought in the Mahabharata war? Again, because this is not interactive, I'm going to give you the answers. But before I throw the answers, see if you can imagine yourself. In the Mahabharata war, in the 18 days, the total number of army or amount of army that fought is described as 18 aukshohini. Think of aukshohini as like a battalion, as a battery or something like this. If you look at the Mahabharata description, it amounts to, the all 18 aukshohini amounts to about 4 million men or 40 lakhs. Same 4 million is same as 40 lakhs. And these were exclusive men that were fighting. Okay. Today is what? Male day or something. Purusha Din, somebody told me. Okay. So men, when the ladies do the lot of work and the male has nothing to do, then they will fight. You can see that in the Papua New Guinea. Most of the work is done by the ladies. Well, maybe in India too. And the men, with not much to do, they wear their gear and all their specific tribal gear, and they just fight until somebody is seriously injured or dies. That's when the war stops. Anyways, the humor aside, so there were about 40 lakhs or 4 million men. They fought, and for 18 days, and they were gone. 99.99% were gone. Now, we don't know the exact population of that time, but even without knowing it, just a question, another question I asked myself in 2011 is, suddenly 4 million people vanishing, and 4 million must be a significant number as a net percent of population that time. Could it have some effect on the posterity, like us, basically? And can that be observed? Now, I did not have any evidence in 2011, but all I did is like a meditation for 4 years. And in 2015, this paper by Monica Carmin in Genetics came out. Quickly, the x-axis is the time axis, y-axis is the NF ratio to NM, like, the variety, the variety of the female chromosomes to the ratio of male chromosomes. So NFF is female, M is male. And if nothing extraordinary is happening, let me see if I can draw the signal to noise ratio. If you have electrical engineers or electronics engineers in the crowd, this is the signal. I'm going to talk about this peak here. And this is the noise. If nothing is happening, what is the noise? Noise is 3, about 3, between 3 and a 4. Can anyone imagine why the noise is 3 and 4? Because remember, if you look at a couple, just a random couple, so if, what do we call, say Mr. and Mr. and Mrs. Gupta, okay, they enter the room. If we are just know them, we say, oh, Mr. and Mrs. Gupta entered the room. But if he's a geneticist or molecular biologist, he or she looks at them and says, well, 3X's and 1Y entered the room, in a female 2X's, in a male 1X, 1Y. So if nothing is happening, kind of distribution you have, the variation, the variety is 3:1, 3X's:1. So that's what you are seeing, this noise. But something extraordinary happened somewhere here. Something happened here too, around 60,000, 56,000, but just please ignore that. Something extraordinary happened around the tallest peak. And what happened? The variation ratio between the female chromosomes, X chromosomes to Y chromosomes, there was a bottleneck in the Y chromosomes. Okay. The variation in the Y chromosomes went down so much that the ratio became from 3 to 4, significantly shoot up to about 16, 17. So if you do the ratio of signal to noise, it will be like 17 divided by 3. So that's like about 5 is to 1. If you look at absolute, it's 16 is to 1. Now, this may be a bit confusing to many of you or maybe overwhelming, but think of an earthquake. If you hear of earthquake, you ask three questions like how serious was the earthquake, like a Richter scale? Where did it happen? That is to say, what was the epicenter? And when did it happen? Think of this Mahabharata war as a male chromosomes earthquake. Okay. Significant male were gone, 4 million men were gone in less than 18 days. And look what has happened. Okay. Now I'm going backward, of course, because these paper guys don't know anything about Mahabharata. But they said there was a significant Y chromosomes bottleneck here. Now, when was it? If you take this peak and bring the line down, it comes to 7,500 years ago. You also know the extent of the signal. Now, one more question you have to answer, and that is where did it happen? Which is to say, what was the epicenter? Okay. And this is just an explanation for that 3 is to 1 ratio, the signal to noise. Okay. Absolute score 16 is to 1, 5 is to 1. And the answer is India. What was the epicenter? Where was the epicenter? Epicenter was India. This is forest green line. So this is called South Asia here. So if I go here, this is what you're going to see. So South Asia is a wrong term. We can call it Bharat. It is there into your purpose of your group, Bharat Varsha, Bharat India. And this green line is the first one to deviate. Okay, so the first one to deviate, the highest, the longest to stay with that deviation, and only the last one to recover. Think of this as the characteristic epicenter for an earthquake, but also in this case for a genetic quake. Okay. So, and then who are the next one? Those who fought also in the Mahabharat war, but not from the present day India. So, for example, if you go for the next line, this orange line, that is the Near East, which is the Middle East. And there were people coming from there. And also then the next one is the blue line, which is east of India, like Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, and so on. You see the effect of that too. And if I had a time, I would have asked you the question if it was interactive. What is happening in Europe? Very interesting. The Europe, this yellow line is showing exactly same signature like India, except the difference is it's delayed by about 2000 years. Instead of instead of here 7,000, 8,000 years, it is showing around like a 5,000 years before today. Okay. And in the question answer, I may ask you that question. But just this is another piece of evidence, again from the ground, that shows very, very consistent picture that matches with the Mahabharata. Quickly, I want to share a few more things in less than 5 minutes or so. Let me see how am I doing on time here. I may be a bit over. Okay, let me take 5 minutes. And anything I don't cover, we can do in a question answer if you have a time. So just like that European line that I showed you, actually, I'll give you the answer and we can discuss more in the question answer. See what is happening with this European line, why it is showing the same signature as what has happened in India or Middle East, but only 2000 years after. Well, essentially, this is a signature of the gene pool that is affected by the Mahabharat war, but now that same signature is going to Europe. So this is essentially out of India migration. The reason I just gave that answer here is because now you can understand this better. This is a Bonhomme paper again from genetics, but in this time not with the human beings, but with the domestic mouse. Everyone knows what you call the carrier, the Vahan of Ganesha. Now, what is the big deal about the domestic mouse? The big deal about the domestic mouse is it's directly, closely connected with agriculture. Okay, so anytime a settled civilization happens, agriculture happens, people start staying in one place, storing grains, cooking grains. That's when these wild rectus or whatever the different varieties, they become domesticated one. They change their shape, change their breeding cycle, so on and so forth, change their hunting habits and so on, because they could just enjoy, just like human beings, sit in one place and enjoy the grains. But interestingly, all the domestic mice around the world, if you look at their varieties, and if you do a genetic study, this was done by Bonhomme, German scientist group in 2007. What is the map showing you? If they have to go find their ancient home, okay, the original home, all the domestic mice of the world, if they do their search or if we do it for them through genetics, it comes to India. This is basically, forget America and all, but this is basically a out of India migrations of people. They went, it's not like suddenly they took a flight, so they have gone slowly expansions. And along with them, they have taken agriculture, and along with them, the domestic mice has also traveled. This is not limited to domestic mice. This is also true about the zebu cow, the cow with the hump, which is a characteristic Indian cow. It has gone outside, but what you will also find, and I want to go fast through this, even the Taurian cow, the Taurus cow with a no hump, if you go back, you find that the mother of a Taurus cow is also a zebu cow, okay? But we would have to go back thousands of years for that. And this is the same data, like out of India migrations of the cows, guys. And I mean, you can be with me that the cows did not just decide, hey, let me take a vacation in Switzerland. So naturally they are going with the outward migrations of human beings, taking along with them the farming but also the cows, okay? And these are all genetics papers. What am I going to say? Mahabharata researchers don't like science. I don't know what that is. Okay, so I'll just fast forward to that right now. Okay, quickly some more point on astronomy. If you are in case wondering, like, okay, so 300 astronomy descriptions in Mahabharata, 600 in Ramayana, and you solve like a jigsaw puzzle as if like Valmiki and Vyasa has created this puzzle. Was the astronomy so advanced? Well, you'll be amazed. I don't know if I saw like 70 individuals. I did not realize if anybody's name was Swati. But if any one of you had a name Swati, or your mother's name is Swati, or if you have a sister named Swati, well, you can tell this story. The story of Swati is one of the 27, 28 nakshatra is very amazing. Okay. In the Ramayana, which is more than 14,000 years ago, as Hanuman is ready to jump from India to Lanka, okay, Ravana's Lanka, not to confuse with Sri Lanka, but Ravana's Lanka, Hanuman is describing, and of course, Valmiki is telling us, and Hanuman is telling other Vanaras, again, these are Vanaras are human beings, okay, guys? So we'll take that in a question answer. You might already know this from 21 notes. So he's jumping and he says, look, I mean, he's just saying, what am I going to do? He says, Bhavishyati hime pantha swate pantha iva ambare. Just like star Swati travels in the sky or has traveled in the sky, I am going to travel like that from here to Lanka. Now, what's the big deal? Because nakshatra, by definition, is the one that does not move. But Hanuman is talking about a moving path of a Swati. Now, why is that? Something more interesting. If you look at some other text, like say Taittiriya Samhita, which is a part of Yajurveda, the same nakshatra Swati is like English, it's called Arcturus, okay, is called Nishtam, that is the name. And in Sanskrit, the Nishtam means a foreigner or traveler. Okay, or if you look at another text, this is Apastambi Gruhya Sutra. Again, the Swati is referred to as a Nishtha. In fact, here it is, very interesting advice is given. It says, a father who loves his daughter, if he wants his daughter to be very happy after she's married, okay, with that married new family, he should marry her on a Swati nakshatra. Okay, that's what this Sanskrit thing is telling. And why is that? Because Nishtam means a traveler or a foreigner. Because a girl, after marriage, when she goes to the other house, she's like a foreigner to that family. And she is traveling from one household to another household. And that is basically the story of Swati. Okay. So, in fact, what is this whole deal? The important point to take away is that Swati, which is a part of our 27 nakshatra and therefore along the path of the sun, If you go back about 60,000 years, it was not anywhere close to the path of the sun, but it was very close to the pole star. In fact, it was a pole star 60,000 years ago. But it has such a fast, proper motion that if you see this motion, that's how it has traveled, just like Hanuman is also going to jump. But what does that tell you? Hanuman is saying this, or Valmiki is saying this 14,000 years ago. And it is they're describing the phenomenon that they are watching for 60,000 years, or at that time, maybe what, 40,000 years, whatever the number. The point is that's how deep antiquity Indian astronomy has, and therefore Indian civilization. Okay. And you can see this everywhere. When Krishna killed Kamsa, this is not in Mahabharata, but this is into the appendix of Mahabharata called as Harivansha. There is a very beautiful description given, and such a unique description, just like the Bhishma Nirvana evidence, just like Arundhati Vasishta evidence, that this thing that I'm showing you there, and because of time, I'll not walk you through this. Such a amazing sight was not seen since 5622 BC, or if you go back, say 15, 20,000 years before that. It's such a unique phenomenon. This is Andhaka describing to Kamsa just before Krishna killed Kamsa, and therefore we can come up with the uh, year when Krishna killed Kamsa, and basically we can figure out when exactly those events happen. Just quickly, I want to show you the Indian astronomy was very, very precise. I will not spend much time. Again, I have gone over my time here. But even 2000 years to 2500 years ago, when Greeks were, finally doing something with astronomy, the ancient model of India for the equation of the sun, which is to predict the position of the sun. So this solid line is the Indian line, and the dotted line is a Greek line. This solid line, the Indian model error was half of the Greek model, but something very interesting. Greeks were calibrating right their own time, whereas Indian model was actually the old one. Okay, so it was bit not as good by the time of the Greeks. And if you go back, actually it tells you the Indian model for predicting the position of the sun as given in Surya Siddhanta was most precise at the time of Mahabharata, 55, 50, 55, 500 BC, 5500 BC. Okay. And if you look at the latitudes, Indians are measuring it for a very long time. This is a paper by Anil Narayananji, former ISRO scientist, aeronautical engineer, showing this was measured 10,000 years ago. Okay, the nautical miles, if you have heard about it, has to do with the navigation. That's also coming from Surya Siddhanta. Okay, the elliptical orbits, some of you from physics background, like Kepler, if the Johannes Kepler name rings a bell, in the West, last 400, 500 years, he figured out that the orbits are not circular but elliptical. But if you look at Surya Siddhanta, actually there is a model for an elliptical orbit going back to Mahabharata times, 7,500 years ago, or there is a description of an elliptical orbit going back to Ramayana times. And this is in Surya Siddhanta, by the way, not in Mahabharata or Ramayana. And then last one. Sometimes people ask, say, hey, what is your problem with you Indians, or at least the Dharmic Indians? Once something is found out by modern science, then you guys get excited and you say, hey, look, this is also described in Ramayana, this is also described in Mahabharata or Rigveda or wherever. Why don't you guys do this? Why don't you give some prediction from your text first and let the modern science chase it? Okay, this is the kind of criticism, and sometimes rightfully so, that I have heard many times. So me and Anil Narayanan, now he's no longer with ISRO. He's a consultant in Washington DC, and I'm in Atlanta. We looked at some of the data from Surya Siddhanta, published a paper, and basically now here we are making predictions which are in astronomy. Qualitatively, modern science agrees with it, but quantitatively, modern science is clueless. What is been the actual numbers that are given in Surya Siddhanta? So the argument that was made that guys, once science figures it out, you guys always claim, we wanted to turn it upside down. We said, hey, here we have shown you a historical ancient claim. Now it is a job of modern science to show whether modern science is capable of validating it. Okay. These are the different areas that I have looked at evidence from. I just showed you oceanography, what was that? Genetics, and maybe a little bit of geology. These are my three books. If anyone is interested in reading books still in the whole world of reels and shorts, This is on Amazon if you are outside India. If you are within India, definitely go for this source, Subbu Publications. And even if you don't want to read, I have about what thousands of videos. I don't know if you watch my Ranveer show. I hear among the young crowd he's pretty popular. I have like what three? I forgot now. I think three podcasts with him. So definitely watch that. Also watch one by Rupa Bhati, who is my co-researcher, and we are researching together for what now 10 plus years. But you can do that. So that's it. My apologies if I went over time.